Hello, I'd like to welcome you to the History Project Work Group. This is a series where the SVS is interviewing pioneers in vascular surgery, and today it's my distinct pleasure to interview Dr. John Harris, who's one of our honorary members of the SVS. Dr. Harris, thank you very much for coming today.
Pleasure.
So let's start off. Tell me, when and where were you born?
I was born in a country town in New South Wales, Australia called Grafton, and it's about 900 miles north of Sydney, 900 kilometres north of Sydney.
Tell me about your parents.
My dad was in general practice, my mother was a nurse. Both of their respective paternal influences were on the medical side, so there's been quite a strong medical history in the family. On my father's side, it goes back about 6 generations. So,
Oh my goodness, were any surgeons?
No, but in those days they did a bit of everything. So my father's father in Armidale, which is a country town in New South Wales, was the radiologist, the ophthalmologist and the general practitioner.
Oh my
And when I did rounds with my father, you'd see somebody whose baby he'd delivered, a spleen he'd taken out, a fracture he'd set, someone he'd counselled for depression. There was just everything.
Oh my goodness. And do you have any siblings?
I have a brother and a sister. My brother buys and sells cattle, and my sister is a physiotherapist.
Wow, so really kept it in the family. So tell me how you developed an interest in becoming a surgeon first, and then specifically vascular surgery.
I enjoyed anatomy, and I enjoyed doing things with my hands. One of my father's hobbies was woodwork and things. So I started off early on doing that, usually holding things for him while he did all the intricate bits. And from there it flowed on, and I wasn't much good at the internal medicine side of things, but somehow I did quite well in surgery. So I topped my year in surgery, and I thought, well, that's telling me something, and I drifted into it from there. And I really didn't have a clear choice of specialty. At that time, vascular was just beginning in a sense, and I did general surgery, then went and worked in England for a while, did general surgery there, and then developed a focused interest on vascular and went from there. And I was influenced by people I'd worked with in Sydney, particularly Jim May, who had evolved through general surgery transplantation into the early days of vascular, and quite enjoyed it, so it flowed on from there.
Interesting. So I think that brings us into, logically, some questions about vascular surgery in your country. So first off, is vascular surgery an independent specialty in Australia?
Yes, we had a rather smooth transition. For vascular to emerge as a separate specialty, we were lucky that the president of our college at that time was a vascular surgeon, John Royal, and could see the wisdom of it. And the division of vascular surgery actually occurred in 2007. So we've had separate examination and processes from quite early on, and that's been quite a successful partnership between the college and the Board of Vascular Surgery. And so it's been there for quite a while.
You said since 2007. So it's been its own independent specialty for 6 years? Okay, so tell me about the training requirements. If somebody wants to become a vascular surgeon, when do they need to be identified that they're going into vascular surgery, and how does the training follow?
They have basically they've got an undifferentiated year after they graduate in medicine. And then usually 1 or 2 years they can work out what they want to do and apply for the entry into training programs in the College of Surgeons if they're going to the surgical bent, and specifically apply to the boards of the various specialties, including vascular surgery, if that's what they want to do. And usually they'll be appointed in their 3rd postgraduate year, and then the surgical training is about 5 years after that. So it's quite a long process, and one of the problems in our country relates to the length of the training program and the implications that has with people coming out of graduate medical programs a little bit older than they were before that was a requirement.
So what is the length right now if somebody wants to go into a vascular surgery program?
Once they're in vascular surgery, it's 5 years, and they do 3 years, usually 3 years after graduation before they enter into vascular.
Okay, so it could be upwards of 8 years then. And that does not include research time, or does that include research time?
That includes research time.
Where does the research fit into that training?
Well, a lot of them, to become competitive, to get into vascular, do research as part of that. We've set up a master's program at our university that they can do either by coursework or by supervised research, which they often do to make them more competitive to get into the vascular training programs. So they're still sought after positions, and we get a good crop of applicants every year coming through.
Okay, so that first 3 years may include the research. Then they do
Yes.
5 years of dedicated vascular surgery
Correct.
training, not
Yes.
general surgery. But
No.
so that would be akin to what we have in the States with our integrated training program,
Yes.
where they apply out of medical school to the integrated training program.
Yes.
Okay, so now let's say that somebody has finished the training in vascular surgery. What is the certification process like in Australia?
We have an examination process that's supervised through the College of Surgeons, which is a little different to the States. And they sit those exams, and once they've satisfied the criteria for that, then they're through, and they're moving away from an endpoint exam to one related to achievement of certain goals along the way in terms of operative experience or clinical experience to meet the requirements of it. So it's if someone doesn't meet those requirements in, say, year 3, they may be held over till they meet those criteria and to move on to the next year.
But once they're done with the 5 years of training,
Then they're out in practice.
is there a certificate? Like in America, we have to take our qualifying, which is our written boards, and our certifying, which is our oral boards. Is there a similar
No,
process?
ours are combined. The exam combines both the oral and the writtens.
Okay, and they take that after they finish their training.
Correct.
Okay, and then they are certified to do vascular surgery. Now, if they're certified to do vascular surgery, is somebody in your country able to do general surgical procedures, for example, small bowel resections or, tracheostomy?
I think less and less. The exposure they get to general surgery's decreased considerably from what it was when I trained. So increasingly, I think people are calling for backup for those sorts of situations when they arise. There are particular problems in rural Australia, as I imagine they are in rural United States, and particularly in New Zealand, which our program's integrated with, where there is a need for people to have more general skills, and we have special rural programs to try and develop a broad spectrum of training ability for people that are specifically targeting those careers to serve those communities.
That's interesting. What if somebody wanted to do general surgery and then do vascular, kind of like our traditional paradigm in the States, where they do 5 years of general surgery and then a 2-year fellowship? Does that possibility exist?
Yes. So there's a fair degree of flexibility in the program, and provided they meet the requirements for it, they can change specialty or whatever. That was of particular concern to the general surgical programs, because they'd have people electing to do general surgery but then opting out of it to go into some other specialty, affecting their projections on their manpower needs and so on. So it's not completely resolved, but it seems to work out reasonably well in practice.
Something that you touched on is, you said a challenge is the length of your training program. Elaborate on that a little bit more. What are the problems specifically, and then what do you see as a better training model? Is there a better training model?
Well, it seems to be a sort of a pattern of institutions to add a couple of years to everything whenever they tackle a problem. But when I did what was called a living certificate exam. So I left school at 16 and entered medicine. And at that time we had a 6-year course. I finished at 21. And then did my surgical training, which with our college was 9 years all up. So I was completely finished my surgical training in terms of the college requirements in Australia by 29, and then I went and did a fellowship in England, and that was there, and then I came over to the program at Northwestern in 80-81. So I'd completed both the Australian and the UK requirements there. The median age of graduation at the University of Sydney at the moment with the graduate medical program is about 30. And then if you add to it what we've just discussed, the training requirements there of what amounts to 7-8 years, they're going into practice in 30, 38, somewhere around there, with all the implications that has for finance and family and all the other things that make it difficult.
So do you find that you're having a hard time in your country attracting medical students to actually go into surgery?
No, the medical students are still keen. We had a careers night recently, and there's about well, let me back up a little bit. The medical students have become very active politically in terms of organising what they want and getting the institutions to respond to their vocational needs. Yeah. And so that some of those evenings you'll have 500 students, whatever, turn up, which I expected to turn up to talk to 20 or 30 and suddenly found I had a full room. So that there's certainly a lot of interest in surgical careers. And there's no lack of talent certainly in coming through on that side.
Do you think that the length of the training program is affecting your ability to attract women into surgery?
Well, I've been blessed with 3 daughters, one of whom did medicine, and she looked at the training requirements and what she wanted to do, and has gone into radiation oncology for those sort of reasons. Our college is very receptive to trying to facilitate fractional training programs to try and meet the needs for women in particular. And that's sort of being worked through by a pretty active group at the moment. But at the moment it's still sort of worked through on an informal basis rather than being completely governed by regulations through the college.
I would actually echo that, because I am familiar with one of the programs that we actually had one of the surgeons from Australia come and present at one of our meetings about, and it was the part-time residency program. And I think that's great that you guys are leading the way on that, and hopefully that will help to recruit more women into surgery.
Was that Jill Tomlinson?
No.
That's another one.
Yeah, but I think it is something that is unique, and I hope to see more of that. So that's really good. Now, what about in vascular surgery? In the United States, with the advent of endovascular surgery, it becomes a very sticky arena, because there's many different specialties who are involved in wanting to participate in endovascular surgery, including interventional radiologists, interventional cardiologists, etc. Is this similar in Australia?
Yes, in terms of turf wars, you mean?
Yes,
yeah.
try to be, say it nicely.
Well, I represented vascular surgery on our College of Surgeons, and someone drew to me the attention of what was a conjoint training committee in endoscopy, and that's where another field of surgery where you had competition for the various medical groups and so on, and they set up an intercollegiate group to develop recognition for training. So we set one up for recognition of training in endovascular skills, which is the membership of which is made up by vascular surgery, radiology and cardiology. So we have a conjoint committee that recognises training, and so it's overcome a lot of those credentialing issues and turf issues in the hospital, and we added modules related to carotid stenting or thoracoabdominal aortic stent grafting, so that it's not a credentialing body, but it signs off on the training. And that's
But do you mean all the different specialties can do endovascular surgery? They just need to be credentialed for it?
By their own institution. But we've got a common intercollegiate body to sign off on training. So it's decreased the amount of turf tension that was there from before.
Interesting. So what % of your endovascular surgery is done by vascular surgeons versus cardiologists versus interventional radiologists?
I think that's a pretty rapidly changing dynamic. Earlier it would have been virtually a situation before the advent of endovascular where most of the angiographic intervention was done by radiologists, and that just changed very dramatically once vascular surgeons got involved in it. And the majority of the work now would be done by vascular surgeons. There's a different distribution in Australia that I understand still, that say for carotid endarterectomy, some of it's done by general surgeons, some by purely vascular, some by cardiac, whereas in Australia about 98% will be done by vascular surgeons, so it's a slightly different distribution, and the same thing's therefore happening on the endovascular side of it. But most of the units that have done well are with the that have got a good working relationship between the radiologists and the vascular surgeons. I think in our country there's concern on our part about a lack of good interventional radiologists coming through now. Most of them have got into the MRI and CT and computer manipulation of imaging rather than the skills that they had as interventional, to drain the abscesses and to gain access and all those things that happened before. So at the moment we have a relatively good working relationship between the various colleges, and I think it's in everyone's interest to try and keep it working like that.
And on a similar note, when it comes to the field of vascular surgery, and in particular endovascular surgery, do you feel that Australia and New Zealand have similar challenges, or are there distinct differences that each one of the two countries has to face?
New Zealand's got this problem related to the small population distributed through 2 islands, so they've got a much greater need for general stroke vascular than does Australia. So in Australia, most of the vascular is now done by dedicated vascular surgeons, even in the major regional centres. So that's been the way it's evolved there. I should add that one of the criterion for membership of our society is participation in a national audit, so that we have everybody, well, when I say everybody, we've still got problems with people agreeing to participate. By and large, pretty good compliance with a national audit, so we can show comparative figures in terms of perioperative morbidity and so on related to the various regional hospitals versus the major metropolitan centres, and provided the people have been appropriately trained, there's not a lot of variation.
Can you explain for our audience national order?
Audit. So that every time I do a case,
national
that
audit.
goes into, you say tomato and I say tomato, so that goes into a national audit, and then it's all compiled at the end of the year, and the results of that was published in JVS by Barry Bayliss, I think, last year.
Okay.
And so that's been up and running now for a couple of years.
Interesting. Now back to your training. How prevalent is the use of simulation technology in your training programs?
The college has a specialised skills area down in Melbourne, and most of the hospitals have them. And most people, I think, dabble with simulators at various stages in their training, but there's not a formal requirement as such to have so much experience on simulators. So they've usually do the basic skills part of it as an introduction to it, and then they go from there. My attitude's a bit coloured. I had a friend who was a pilot, and I used to go up and spend time flying in simulators in the 747s, and the realism there versus the realism of sticking a needle in a mannequin is chalk and cheese. So I think for basically learning, the appropriate techniques and assembling the right equipment and perhaps rehearsing a few options, I don't think it's sophisticated enough at the moment to fully replace the experience that you go through in accessing and doing intervention on live patients. So somewhere there's a happy compromise. We're not experimenting on patients, but having enough basic skill sets to know what you're doing when you're faced with that access problem.
Yeah, I would agree. So that leads us to technology. Let's talk a little bit about how technology has really changed our field as vascular surgeons. So you know that, with all of the endovascular surgery that we do, there's lots of innovation that's occurring, and there are lots of relationships that surgeons have with industry. And with that comes a potential for conflict of interest. How is Australia handling the whole issue of conflict of interest with industry support or being on industry advisory committees, etc.?
My gut feeling is the pendulum swung a bit too far. That it's interesting hearing some of the presentations this morning about landmark achievements in vascular surgery, which was Tom Fogarty's balloon and Juan Parodi with the endovascular device, both of which would hopelessly fail current committees of assessment in our hospitals. And somewhere there's a balance between innovation and people being able to do new things, particularly when there aren't industry-based devices available to them. And my overview would be that their own ethics should govern that, and that's probably a better governance process, but of course it's all compounded by usually a couple of bad apples spoil it for everybody, and the rules and regulations that have been put in place by some of the problems that have cropped up have made it very difficult to innovate or change devices to meet the particular requirements, for example with the FDA in the States.
So does Australia have any countrywide rules, or their hospital-specific or Royal Australasian College of Surgeons rules regulating the conflict of interest issues?
Well, the devices are all approved by our own equivalent of the FDA, which is a national body in Canberra. So new devices have to be approved through that, and often they have to meet both FDA and European requirements for release. And then the hospital would have an ethics review process that if you wanted to do something that was innovative, then you would seek approval to do it from there.
Ahead of time. You probably saw this morning, as I did, one of the representatives from the FDA basically spoke out to correct something that was said, and she basically said that if you want to modify any existing device in the United States, then you really need to have an FDA ID approved, even on a patient-by-patient case. So is it similar in Australia? that level of regulation?
I think we still have a little bit more flexibility. That I noticed that the President indicated that if you needed it on a clinical grounds and you could justify it as a one-off individual thing, then you're probably okay. And more broadly, but the reality is if you've got a clinical problem and you can see a way around it, and there's no easy way to cross-refer or to get help in, and I think surgeons have always improvised to the best that they can with the facilities they've got for the care of the individual patient. So I hate to see that part of it overly regulated.
Well, we do have to remember we always can revert to open surgery.
Correct. Correct.
Which I think oftentimes some people forget.
Yeah.
With respect to training and the endovascular era, an issue that has arisen in the States is that we find that in many programs, residents are being well trained in endovascular surgery, but training in our core open surgery procedures is declining. Is this a similar problem in Australia or no?
I was doing a case the other day and the room filled up with people. And I thought something odd was going on. I was looking around and I said, "What's going on?" And they said, "You're doing an aneurysm." And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "But it's open." And so if you look at the dramatic change that's occurred since the 90s, that the open procedures have become a rarity almost compared to it. So I think there is a major issue there related to it, because it's going to be like the problems that occurred with the endoscopic approach to the biliary tree, that the easy ones were easy to do endoscopically. When you got into complications, they not only didn't have that experience of straightforward open work to fall back on, they were being thrown in at the more complex end of the spectrum. So the cases that aren't suitable for endovascular repair for aneurysm work, or that have got complications, are right at the complex end of the spectrum, and yet they're the ones that they're being expected to learn on. So I think there is an issue.
I think that's very interesting observation.
We're still lucky in Australia that there are still places a little bit dinosaurish with their approach to endovascular. So by rotating our residents around the country, you can usually get a good experience of open endovascular, and I'm sure that'll change.
In Australia, do you have something equivalent to the 80-hour work week for residents like what we have in the States?
They're moving towards it.
Oh, really?
And it's 60 hours, not 80. And I think that's causing major concerns in vascular surgery, because with the advent of endovascular, the amount of open experience people are getting is decreased from what it was. And then if you throw into that the restricted work hours and experience, then that's going to further compromise the experience.
Is it already 60 hours
No,
right now?
No, they're working towards it, yeah.
Are they aware that with the 80-hour work week that was implemented in the United States, now our board failure rates have gone up tremendously? And patient error rates have not been improved because of all the handoffs?
Yeah.
And yet your country's about to go to 60 hours?
Well, I think it's one of those rules that you can sort of see sounds good when you think about it superficially. I was always amused. Again, I had friends in the airline industry, and they have very strict hour limitations. But the people that wanted to be busy kept busy. They get second jobs, and so they'd always be busy.
Yeah.
I think the problems in vascular surgery in particular related to fatigue with undue on-hour, on-call, those sorts of issues, which I think people are becoming much more sensitive to. And you touched on before about making the career path more attractive for women in particular. I think those are things that may be beneficial outcomes from it.
Yeah.
But I think busy people want to remain busy, and that the hours that suit one individual I don't think can be uniformly and evenly applied to everybody.
I would agree with you on that. Having visited your country several times, something that's come up over and over are the challenges to become an academic surgeon. How do you see, or what is your solution in your country to try to help promote young, budding surgeons who want to have an academic career and want to do research?
Well, I think there's no dearth of applicants. They're all keen, and you've participated in the preparation for an academic career course, and there's a lot of interest in it. I think the hiccup at the universities is with this move to graduate medical type training, they don't need highly specialised surgeons teaching at a student level at a university faced with that reduced component of surgical curriculum, whereas the hospitals do. The hospitals like to have their professors of transplantation and neurosurgery and those things. So At our university, they're going through that dynamic at the moment, and I think increasingly, unlike the United States, instead of being purely university-based, that the academics will be hospital-based and have a looser affiliation with the university than perhaps I did during my time. So it's a changing field at the moment.
What about the challenges of getting the research funded, though? Because I understand that's another common complaint when I visit there. And that's not unlike here, as we're facing major budget changes with the NIH. But how do people get their research funded to have an academic career?
Well, I think there are major problems with our equivalent of the NIH, which is the NHMRC. And I think in fairness, a lot of surgical grant applications are not very good compared to competitive ones from medical colleagues. So I think there's an immediate in there to help with people prepare grants. There's a view that if people have got clinical income, then the research income should be perhaps better directed towards those that don't. The college's response to that is to develop a medical foundation, a bit like the foundation here. And we've done the same within our section of vascular surgery to develop our own funding process for people that are there. So I think the approach would be to try and help people make their grant applications more competitive for the national funding opportunities, and to provide alternative pathways specifically for surgeons.
I think that sounds fabulous, and maybe something else that the academic section, which you had chaired in the past, could also take on, because there's been a lot of wonderful things that the academic section has done. Tell me also, let's shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about the SVS. And let's talk about the merger that happened, as we know, 10 years ago. The 10 years ago when the AAVS and the SVS merged. What were your thoughts about the merger? Did you think that the merger was a good thing at the time, not a good thing? Do you think that it was beneficial for the international members or hurt international members?
I'll be careful what I say, but my overview when I was here is the SVS was an elite group of academically orientated vascular surgeons with a small membership, and then you had the general run of vascular surgery represented through bodies like the ISCVS or the AFS, and they're a little bit apart, and that one couldn't be effective without the mass of the body politic of vascular surgeons behind them. So I was quite pleased to see the two come together because of integrated vascular surgery, and I think the way of recognising individuals within the society, so that you can have a little bit of a recognition of people that have reached academic excellence or whatever within the society, have made particular contributions, but still have the mass of vascular surgeons there is helpful, because in the overall scheme of things, vascular is a small specialty, and you're out there fighting for a diminishing dollar, and that any society to fund its clinical activities to look after patients has to be effective politically. And I think numbers are, in a sense, of the thing that the politicians look at least in our country.
Do you feel that the international members have a sufficient voice in the SVS right now?
I've got no personal reason to complain, and I've enjoyed my relationship with it. When I saw the last list of fellows that came around, international fellows being considered, I was disappointed to see that I think there were no Australians there, and that if you look at the whole current leadership of Australian vascular surgery, they've all been members and valued their relationship with the SVS. Yeah. So I think one of the key things I've got out of the meeting here is to ensure that there is an Australian New Zealand chapter, and that we do all we can to encourage our younger people to do it. It relates back in part to our earlier discussion, because they're coming out of medical school older, and because they've got family and financial commitments at a stage where we're a little bit more mobile, it's much more difficult for them to take a year or two off and go and work in other countries, although I know they'd benefit enormously from doing it.
Yeah, so you brought up just now something I was going to ask you about. Currently, there is not an Australia and New Zealand chapter for the SVS, correct? No. But that is something that you think would work well in Australia and New Zealand?
I think so. I mean, in the old days with the ISCVS, there was a very active Australian New Zealand chapter, and I would think it would be helpful for both bodies. I mean, Australia's got a small population, but we've had a pretty successful track record for innovation in vascular surgery and for providing training opportunities for people from the States to come to Australia. We've had a few of those exchanges work.
Absolutely.
And I think they've been of mutual benefit.
Right now, so in Australia, you have the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, which would be the equivalent to our College of Surgeons. As far as National Vascular Society, do you have a National Vascular Society in Australia, or is it a section of the Royal Australian College
No, it's
of
a
Surgeons?
separate board, but it's integrated within the college. There's tension in the college between the independence of the boards and the college proper, but everyone's recognised the value of trying to keep it together. The orthopaedic surgeons, for example, were looking at succession, and at the moment I think they're backing off a little bit. So at the moment we have an ANZ Society for Vascular Surgery, which runs the boards for appointing vascular trainees in the examination process under the broad umbrella of the College of Surgeons.
Okay, so no separate society. So I think a chapter would actually be very good. As an editor yourself of the Australia-New Zealand Journal of Surgery, let me ask you a question about publications. Do vascular surgeons in Australia value JVS and submitting manuscripts to JVS? Would that be a priority, or would a priority be submitting them to the Australia-New Zealand Journal of Surgery?
Well, the ANZ Journal of Surgery, getting around the problem,
I know, you've got to abbreviate it.
is really a general journal for surgeons generally. And and the big problem there, of course, is that people that do high quality specialty work will choose to publish it in the best journal internationally that they can. So that people that do some outstanding work in vascular surgery, I think, would regard the JVS as the premier journal in that domain and look to it to first publish their work. We've tried to seek papers that have a more general appeal, or that have a particular ANZ flavour that may not be as appropriate for an international audience. So I think at the moment for most specialties that would be the way it would work.
What about venous disease? I think we've been seeing an increase in interest in venous disease here in the States, and as you're probably aware, JVS has now spun off a second journal dedicated just to venous disease. What are your thoughts on that?
I think venous and lymphatic disorders have always been a bit the Cinderella of our profession. I might add to that arteriovenous malformations as well. And so that I think to have a specific academic focus on improving what we can do for patients suffering from those disorders can only be welcome. And I think separating it off is quite good. In our country, a lot of venous work are done by dedicated phlebologists, stroke dermatologists, all the way through to general surgeons to vascular. And if you just look at litigation as a parameter, all the problems are with people that haven't had a proper grounding in care of the circulation broadly, that go into areas perhaps where they shouldn't. And so I think trying to get more specialised care for some of these is difficult, but you've got that mix of spectrum of disorders ranging from the cosmetic through to the complex, occlusions of the cava and all those other things that require a lot more expertise to deal with.
What do you think is one of the biggest challenges right now facing vascular surgeons in Australia?
Well, I think decreasing the age of our trainees, and that's to get the universities to bend a bit rather than to compromise the training program length as such. I think the problems we've touched on about getting appropriate training in open techniques, which are still going to be needed, and picking up again that earlier thread of making it attractive to make the program flexible enough to take on the different lifestyle needs of people that are coming into the field, and making it attractive for them to work in.
Yeah. So if you had somebody approaching you who's a medical student, and they came to you and said they really want to be a surgeon, what advice would you give them at that early stage?
Well, I think the sooner you identify what you want to do, well, let me back up a little. I don't think it's for me to make a decision about what they should or shouldn't do, although you meet the odd individual where the communities would be much better served by them never doing surgery, so making sure they've got appropriate insight. But for those people that truly want to do it, I think the sooner they declare their hand, the better, and be influenced by a good mentor to help them through the various choices. We've been very lucky with the Women in Surgery group for people, women that are choosing to do surgery. They're very supportive, and we perhaps would model that on the other side to help some of our young male people coming through because it's not as integrated in the approach to it. And I think a lot of them flounder because there's so much choice there these days. It's very difficult for them to find their identity early enough and to get the training opportunities that are there.
What is the, do you know what the rough number of women in your general surgery training programs are?
General surgery's getting up around 30-40%, but it's much less in vascular and orthopaedic, so there's a lot of specialty differences, even though the global number's getting up to what would be perceived as a desirable thing. I'm really amused about it because I told you about my great-grandfather's family, and he was a number of 8 brothers, or 8 of them, 7 men and 1 lady. And all the boys did medicine at the University of Sydney, and this is only 3 or 4 generations ago, and the girl was turned back on the grounds that they didn't have a female urinal at the medical school, so she had to go to Edinburgh to do medicine. So it has changed quite a lot in a short time.
Okay. Now, again, as an editor, let's talk about publishing. So I think the landscape of publishing is starting to change just a little bit. We have this explosion of all the open access journals. You are an editor of a more traditional journal. What are your thoughts on open access journals? And do you think that this is the wave of the future? What do you think?
Well, at the moment, our journal's a commercial product that returns to the publisher and to the college. And if everything's free and made generally available, then there are some commercial realities in that I think the publishers have to deal with. I think all of them are anticipating a move to paperless journal publication, and also anticipating a strong move to public access, particularly where it's a requirement of certain funding bodies, where it's a requirement that they do it. The compromise we've got at the moment is that I select a number of articles which are put into the public domain and are freely available for each issue. And to be frank, the journal's got a website, and if people that could reasonably want to get access to us, medical students or whatever, it's not very difficult to do through the various universities. So at the moment we still have a formal subscription for the journal, and it pays its way, but increasingly people that want to access it for free basically don't have to try too hard to do it.
But so you're saying with your journal, a certain percentage of reissue is public domain and free?
Yes.
Oh, that's nice.
So I pick out the ones that I think would be of most general interest, and I can make that as many as I like, but generally about 3 an issue.
Interesting. And does the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons own the journal outright, or is it a relationship similar to what JBS has?
It's usually a negotiated arrangement with a particular publisher.
Yeah.
At the moment with Wiley Blackwell, which seems to be working quite well. We couple that with, we've got the journal, we've got an on-site, a journal website that's integrated with it, and that's quite good if you want to put an operative video clip in, or someone's a bit too verbose for the printed journal, you can let them do it. And then it's categorised in specialties, so we've tried to pick out old articles that were relevant, of historical importance, that are all incorporated into it. And then there's a lot of databases in it, and then finally there's a surgical wiki that's based on a surgical textbook which is freely available, which is a basic surgical textbook for students. So we try and integrate those 3.
Oh, interesting. I like this. Yeah, I did see that actually. SurgWiki.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, that's very nice actually. Now, the other issue that I think is an interesting issue that's been brought up in the publishing world is the whole peer review process. There are many people that feel that when you invite other people who are experts on that very topic, that there is a conflict of interest there as well. What do you think about that? Does the peer review process need to change? Do you think it's a good process?
Well, it's, the summary of that would be that it's sort of the best we've got at the moment. But it's interesting to watch increasing electronic assessment of manuscripts come through, things like plagiarism checks and things like that, and basic searches to ensure that some of the common problems of dual publication or whatever are avoided. I think an author is well served by a good review if it's done in a constructive and practical sense. And I think that's probably the most reasonable way you could go. I'm well aware of the earlier discussion in relation to both the Fogarty and Perotti papers being knocked back early on, and that just goes to show the flaws of it.
How both, and this is just to remind people, is how both Fogarty and Perotti's original descriptions were rejected by JBS. Yes.
Well, my overview of JVS, when it first kicked off, it was really orientated towards university departments and basic science, and was less relevant to the practicing clinical surgeon. And I think some of the competition, if you will, really addressed and was more addressed to that audience of the practicing clinical surgeon. And then I think it was a little slow in picking up on the endovascular revolution, and that fell to other areas. Now I find when I read it, the balance is all there. The majority of the articles be endovascular based. The basic science is still there, but as a defined part of the journal. And so I think as a practicing surgeon interested in the academic side of it, it's struck a much happier medium in that role.
Yeah. It's a grand question. What do you think is the future for vascular surgery?
Well, it's fascinating that in my lifetime I've known most of the people that have led it and developed it. DuBois did his procedure in 1951. I was born in 1949, so I was 2 when that happened, and it's all occurred. And we went through, there was no computers, there was no CT scans and all the rest of it. And I think people felt it was plateauing out with the use of prosthetics and so on, and a better understanding of basic science. And then we've had this endovascular revolution, and it's changed everything there. But if you step right back from it, we still don't understand the basic science of the disease processes we're treating. So it's like doing a kidney transplant and fixing the renal failure, but you really haven't fundamentally understood what's going on with it. So I think there's still enormous scope to gain a greater understanding of the basic science, if you will, of what's going on with the conditions we treat.
I couldn't agree with you more. With respect to training, what are your thoughts on international fellowships or traveling fellowships? And let's discuss both directions. So whether it's Americans going to Australia to learn novel techniques, or Australians coming to the States to do fellowships, as you did, Northwestern.
Well, I was very grateful for that opportunity, but I've been lucky enough to work in New Guinea and England and the United States as part of my training, and you see completely different healthcare systems and get a feel for different ways of solving issues, and you develop contacts with the people that are there. And increasingly in our country, it's for both the economic and social reasons, it's difficult for people to travel overseas, and the bureaucracy is such that of travelling to work and operate in another country clinically is almost impossible. I think it would be to the detriment of the profession to lose that ability to act in a collegiate sense. Atheroma is the same in the United States as it is in Australia. The clinical challenges are the same, and yet we've seen in some of the examples we've discussed that the innovation and advance has occurred internationally. It's not just been either US based or Australian for that matter. And I think we are an international community, and it'd be a real shame if our training is so limited that the opportunity to draw on those skills and experiences lost.
I would agree. Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you for coming and being part of this interview series. It was a pleasure to be able to interview you today, and thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.